Scattered across this province, especially north of the French River, are towns that boomed when the resources they possessed were in high demand. But just as good fortune comes, it can slip away too. And what comes next for such places is the subject of the six-part TVO original documentary series. It's called Crossroads, Beyond Boom and Bust. Jennifer Horvath is the series producer responsible for the program, and she joins us now here in studio. So nice to have you here.
Thank you, Steve.
And we should tell everybody, you're not related to the former NDP leader because
I'm not.
She's a W and you're a V.
That's right.
But you pronounce it the same way.
Pronounce it the same way.
Jennifer, we're going to show everybody a little bit of your work and then come back and chat, okay?
Fantastic.
Sheldon, if you would, let's roll the clip.
For almost 50 years, Smiths Falls was proudly known as the chocolate capital of Ontario. Home to 9,000 people and anchored by the giant Hershey's chocolate factory, Smiths Falls was a small-town success story where generations earned a good living in manufacturing, and kids who grew up there could stay in Smiths Falls to find jobs and raise their own families. Tourists came by the busload to visit Hershey's and the Rideau Canal. Then, without warning, it all fell apart.
And doesn't that set up the series to come? What inspired your interest in doing this series?
Well, my colleagues at Alibi Entertainment, the production company, had done a previous series for TVO called Northern Gold about the gold rush in Timmins. And that was so successful that we thought we should maybe look into doing spin-off specifically about towns that had been resource dependent. But when we started doing the research, we found there are so many small towns in Ontario that have gone through this boom and bust cycle. Not all of them just resources. Sometimes it was like Smiths Falls, there was a particular factory that really employed most of the people there. Other places it was more of a cultural tradition. So we did a lot of research, put forward a number of locations, and here we are.
You have criteria that could really apply to dozens of places, if not hundreds, across Ontario. How do you pick six?
It was tough, and we also wanted to make sure that we were trying to get as wide coverage across the province as we could. So some of it was geographical. We have southwestern Ontario, eastern Ontario, northern Ontario, and then a couple in kind of the southern Ontario region. But we wanted places that would each have a unique story. So we really looked for diversity in the experience.
Well, that is one of the neat things about it. You're not just using natural resources as a boom and bust cycle. I mean, you've got cultural industries in there as well.
That's right. Yeah, we have the episode about Stratford, which of course we all know the Stratford Festival, huge source of income for that community. And even though this series was greenlit before the pandemic, Stratford, I think, was really the pandemic story because they were, of course, hugely impacted when theaters had to shut down.
There was life in Stratford before the Stratford Festival. Got to go way back.
That's right. Yeah. But what's so interesting about Stratford is that originally it was a train town. There were thousands of people who worked in the train sheds there. And when the steam engine industry closed down, they went into a bust cycle. And Tom Patterson, who was the person who came up with the idea of the Stratford Festival, grew up in Stratford. He was given an assignment in high school to think of alternative industries for their town. He came up with the idea of the festival in high school, and then it just stuck with him. And later on, when Stratford was really struggling, he went to the city government and said, listen, I really think this is a good idea. He'd been going on about it for quite a while. So they gave him some money to research it, and off he went and created the festival that we have today. It's really an incredible story.
What a visionary.
Yeah.
And how many millions upon millions of people have gone through that small southwestern Ontario town and seen the best of Shakespeare. All right, let's bring some other voices into this conversation as well, now that you've set it up for us, Jennifer. So with all of this background in place, we'll broaden our conversation. With us now in Prince George, British Columbia, Greg Halseth. He is a professor in the geography program at the University of Northern British Columbia and the Canada Research Chair in Rural and Small Town Studies. In Cobalt, Ontario, Sue Nielsen, reporter and photographer with the Temiskaming Speaker. And from Scarborough in the provincial capital, Soheb Shahid, Director of Economic Innovation at the Conference Board of Canada. And we're delighted to welcome you three as well to our discussion tonight. And Sue, let's start with you. I want to find out, first of all, how far your roots in Cobalt, Ontario go back.
Oh, my roots go back to 1906 to when my grandfather, Charles Smith, came to Cobalt to search for fame and fortune and wealth in the mining, in the mines here. My grandmother arrived in 1909, and my other set of grandparents, they arrived shortly thereafter, my father's parents. So the story of Cobalt is actually our family story, which goes back to 1906.
So you say the story of Cobalt, which is essentially what?
It's an incredible story of boom and bust. And the boom that captivated the whole of Canada in 1903, we had 100 mines operating. We had about 15 to 20,000 people living here. There were incredible advances in the mining industry originated here. And we had original CIBC Bank here. The first OPP detachment was here. We can trace there's Cobalt Lake. Yes, that's where all the mining activity pretty much took place around Cobalt Lake.
You had 5 opera houses in that town once upon a time.
Yes, we had 5 opera houses. We had streetcars, and we had brothels.
Well, we don't have to go into too much detail about that, but maybe you could.
No.
Maybe you could just tell us, okay, that was Cobalt at its best. How would you describe Cobalt today?
Well, I wouldn't say we're a ghost town. I hear that description, and I wouldn't say we're a ghost town. We're a population roughly of about 1,000. We seem to be a bedroom community for Temiskaming Shores, where a lot of people work and where the grocery stores and the commerce is, and the medical facilities. So we seem to have been a bedroom community over the years. We've lost a few businesses. But what's really interesting and encouraging now in Cobalt is we're seeing a mini boost in businesses, small businesses opening here. We've had 3 businesses open in the last, say, 4 or 5 months. We're seeing a real estate boom in the area where people from Toronto who are fed up with city life are moving north, and the prices of homes up here and properties are to their liking. So it's really encouraging, and things are happening here.
Okay, let me get Greg in at this part of the story. And maybe you could tell us, Greg, how common you think the Cobalt experience is in terms of boom and bust cycle.
Well, change is one of the stories that really runs through non-metropolitan Canada. You know, I'm coming to you today from the traditional territory of the Clay-Latané, and if there's one thing we know about regions like this, change has been something that's an ongoing story. If we look at non-metropolitan Canada since the end of the Second World War, there was that long period of economic boom, the growth of resource industries, migrations to small places, heavy investments by government. But since the 1980s, a lot of transition around globalization, international competition for capital, et cetera. So the pattern of change is really common. It doesn't matter where you go, actually, in developed Western economies, non-metropolitan places are all facing the question of change, and pretty dynamic change since the 1980s. And we see that across Canada and far more globally.
And is the experience that when, let's say, for example, the mine closes, the city mothers and fathers automatically start looking for the next big thing to come in and replace it? Is that what tends to happen?
Well, historically, that was the pattern. We had people looking for a replacement industry, but really over the past 40 years, the towns that have been successful have been moving on a much more dynamic track. They had been, first of all, looking at who they are and who they want to be so that they know they have a vision that fits with their aspirations. They've been looking at their natural assets around them, including cultural, social, physical, those sorts of things, and thinking about how they can rebundle those in new ways to be competitive in a global economy. Then they invest, as all our communities do, in community development foundations, good services, good quality of life, good amenities, community capacity, build that solid foundation for the future. And then they really work over the long term on diversifying the economy, not bringing in necessarily a new replacement industry, because they can come, they can be very successful, and they can also go. they look to diversify and bring more economic actors into play.
Okay, so Heb, I want to explore this further with you in terms of not necessarily the mill closing down or the mine closing down, but COVID closing down a town. As you look across the province and or the country, can you point to smaller towns or villages in this province or country that literally went through a bust crisis because of COVID and haven't come back yet?
Steve, whenever there is a boom, there has to be a bust at some stage. This could happen due to economic cycles. This could happen due to natural disasters, or this could happen due to a pandemic. And if you look at within economics, you see that booms and busts are a natural part of the economic life cycle. Whenever there is a boom, there are more jobs, the economy grows, investors make more money. Whenever there's a bust, growth slows down, people lose jobs, and investors also lose money. What is problematic, though, is when an economy or a small town can't recover from a bust. And symptoms of that are seen in the form of businesses closing shop, community centers closing down, and people leaving town. And this has been happening for different reasons, and even before the pandemic. For example, it's been happening due to jobs being outsourced to other countries. It's been happening due to new highways being constructed, which are diverting economic traffic elsewhere, as in the case of downtown Epony. And it's also happening because the economic landscape is fast changing globally, and some small towns are struggling to keep up.
Well, Jennifer, let's pursue Stratford, because we talked about that a few moments ago. The assumption is, obviously, Stratford took a major kicking when COVID came in and they had to close everything down. But COVID is more manageable now. Do we assume Stratford has come back?
Well, what's really interesting about Stratford is that they've done exactly what Sahib was mentioning, just in terms of thinking about where they wanted to go. And they did this even before COVID. So Stratford had been pursuing very aggressively a policy of becoming a smart city. They really invested in their own infrastructure to provide utilities, internet, high-speed internet. They've become a community where technology companies go to test out their technology. So they've had a pilot project with timed traffic lights. They have a place where self-driving vehicles can be tested. They've been testing like robotic snow clearing sidewalk robots. So even though they took a real hit with COVID, because they had all these other industries that they had been pursuing, they managed it much better than they would have otherwise.
That speaks to the diversification that Sahib was just talking about.
Absolutely.
So they're not all their eggs are in one Shakespearean basket.
No, exactly. And I think they had learned from the history of what happened when all the train manufacturing shut down there. Thousands of people were out of work. They really didn't want to be dependent on a single industry.
Right. Shall we take a look at another clip from your series?
Let's do it.
Let's do that. Okay. Sheldon, if you would.
There's a lot of projects that went so far, collapsed, and a lot of people got hurt. That particular facility, it was started in 93, 94, and had several reincarnations, several bankruptcies.
That refinery building has had several kicks at the can before. It's never been very successful. I spent 2 years there doing the electrical. Turns out it was a farce. It never panned out to anything. It was a big letdown for everybody, big disappointment. They packed up and left, and nobody got anything out of it. So
we've seen this over the years where companies come here. It's a scheme. They use the name Cobalt, they raise money, they get investors to invest in them because Cobalt has the history, and then they leave.
We have a rule here. Sue has to be in every show that we do here at TVO. That's.
I have to say, I'm so glad to see Sue here today because she has lived through this experience, and I'd love to hear what she has to say about it.
We will get to her in a second because I want to first of all follow up with you on the issue of, I mean, that's Cobalt, and there's a new industry that's come to town in an attempt to kind of bring things back. Tell us about that.
That's right. I mean, this is sort of the latest thing that's happening there is the growth of electric vehicles requires lots of batteries. Cobalt is an essential element in the production of batteries for electric vehicles. So currently, First Cobalt is trying to establish a facility there to process cobalt. Not necessarily mine it there. They would bring cobalt from other parts of the world and process it there. So this is kind of a new idea. They're taking advantage, as these guys pointed out in the clip, taking advantage of a facility that already existed there and trying to build a new technology base from cobalt. So it's a big risk. I mean, it's going to require millions and millions of dollars. They put a lot of money into it so far, but if it's going to grow into what the vision is, it's going to be a big investment.
Sue, what do people in Cobalt think about this potential new great hope?
I mean, it's fantastic. Anytime we can have a big business, a company like that come here, it is fantastic. I must say that they're not called First Cobalt anymore. They've dropped the name Cobalt, which is a bit disappointing to me because they used the story of Cobalt and they used our name to attract investors and promote the business, and yet they've dropped the name Cobalt, officially dropped the name from the company, but that's okay. I wish them all the best of luck. They have $80 million apparently in funding for this project, and they've promised 45 high-paying jobs, which 45 jobs might not sound like a lot in Toronto or other places, but up here it will make a huge difference economically to this region. And we hope that some of those jobs go to Cobalt, to go to Cobalters, and that Cobalt benefits in some way from this project, because it was sold on the auspices of the Cobalt story.
Right. Let's put that in perspective. You're right. 45 jobs in Toronto would not make the newspaper, but what's the population there? 1,000, 1,200, something like that?
Yeah, 1,000, roughly 1,000 in Cobalt, and let's say 10,000 in Temiskaming Shores, where the facility is actually located. It's not located in Cobalt. It never was. It's located in Temiskaming Shores. So Temiskaming Shores is going to get that business tax revenue. And that is going to make the region prosper as well. So, you know, what's good for Temiskaming Shores is often good for Cobalt. You know, we've seen this over the years. Big business have come to the region and used the name of Cobalt and used the Cobalt story to attract investors. And all we ask for is wash the feet of the poor. And what I mean by that is there are lots of organizations, food banks, service clubs, museums that need funding, that need help. And we just ask these corporations to be good corporate citizens when you come here and wash the feet of the poor. I'd like to credit Agnico Eagle Mines for what they've done in Cobalt and what they're doing in Cobalt. They've really been a good corporate citizen. They are a role model for what they've been an excellent friend to Cobalt, and they continue to give money to the town. They've given $1.5 million to create a Cobalt Legacy Fund, which benefits the not-for-profit organizations, the museums, the library here in Cobalt. And they've also done a lot of rehabilitation work with the old mine sites to make it safer to live in this region. So if you're looking for a good corporate company, Agnico Eagle is our friend, and Teck Cominco as well.
Okay, thanks for putting that on the record. Greg, let me get you to follow up on that in as much as if you're in a boom-bust cycle and a big industry comes to town and says, we're going to put some dollars here, the town really can't very well say no, can they?
Well, communities have to make choices about their own futures as well. They're active players in these discussions. As I mentioned, getting a sense of your assets, your aspirations, who you want to be is a critical piece to this. Investing in your community development foundation is a critical piece to this. Once you do that, you can make choices. I can share with you the story. I think it's a very telling story of a successful community in northern BC. It was built as a coal mining town. The coal mines closed. It was, of course, a tremendous challenge. The community worked very hard to diversify their economy. And then, of course, coal prices changed, so new coal mines were opening. And the mayor, when he went to open one of the new coal mines, cut the ribbon and said, you know, I'm welcoming this coal mine back. Great to have you back. We know how to do coal mining here. But make no mistake, we're not going back to being a one industry town. We're going to stay the course on economic diversification. And over time, coal mines have come, coal mines have gone. They close with increasing rapidity because of that faster pace of the global economy. And yet the diversification activities have been very successful. There's a suite of about a half a dozen or more economic activities in that community that all carry it through those economic cycles. So this is the lesson and the pattern for places. There may be opportunities that come. Communities have to make the choice. Will they follow through on that opportunity? And if they do, they have to make sure that they maintain their course on economic diversification. It's a long and difficult challenge, but 20 years of attention to economic diversification, we've seen in community after community after community, can build a broad and robust foundation. Going back to the number of jobs that are coming, it's not just the 40 or 45 jobs in a particular economic activity. It's the spin-off benefits that come from that. You have the people who are then hired to educate the children of those workers. You have the police officers that then are able to be funded. You have the firefighters who are then able to be funded. You have the retail stores that now have a few more customers. These are the benefits of that and why you want to stay on a diversified pathway rather than simply putting all the stock into one player. The last piece that's really important is that it was a cluster of communities talking about a region, and it really is about regional health in these small settings.
Maybe, Soeb, you could follow up on that in this regard. I would assume there are some, town mothers and fathers and political leadership who are watching this right now who are thinking to themselves, when the big industry comes to town, we need to have our ducks in a line and we need to ask the right questions to make sure that this turns into a positive experience and not just a repeat of the same old cycle. So what kinds of questions should they be asking?
Steve, it really goes back to some of the basics of what constitutes a good economic revitalization, and I think the centerpiece of which is diversification. And when I say diversification, I don't just mean product diversification or industry diversification, but I also mean diversification of the labor force. I also mean the diversification of ideas and diversification of welcoming people of different cultures and backgrounds. The other thing I'll say is that I think they also, the community also needs to be mindful and work together with the private sector and public sector to create awareness of the town, to promote its livability, not just in Canada, but also abroad. And to mention, what it has to offer, for example, compared to the GTA. An obvious one is, the lower cost of living. And the final thing I say is that, incentives always work. People respond to incentives. A good example that comes to mind is the Northern Ontario School of Medicine. In its efforts to recruit physicians to the area, has offered free tuition in return for physicians offering their services in northern communities. So it's a combination of these factors that need to be looked at before any community says yes to any proposal.
Just that you mentioned head office. Out of curiosity, where's your head office?
We are a virtual organization, Steve. We were based in Ottawa. I myself in Toronto, but we have colleagues across the country.
So the notion of a bricks and mortar headquarters where it all sort of happens, those days are gone. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. For example, Steve, recently a lot of countries, what they've done is that they have started what is called digital nomad visas. Germany has done this, Spain has done this, and I think this is something we should look into, because what this allows a country to do is that we can have a foreign citizen come and live in Canada without working for a Canadian company. They can work for themselves or for a company that is back in their home country. We do have some programs that allow for remote work for immigrants, and I think that is something we can lean into more, because even though if we do something like this, we can have someone work, we can have someone live in some of these communities without working for a local business. while at the same time benefiting from the lower cost of living and playing their role as consumers in the community, investors in the community, and also, creating, acting as an ambassador for the community when they go back to their own home country or hometown.
Is that to say, Jennifer, that that this opens up a whole bunch of new possibilities in terms of the Cobalts of the world?
Absolutely,
potentially does.
and that was something that we really saw across the communities that we filmed in, where there were people who have obviously lived there for generations, who have been working very hard to keep the lights on, but they were also really welcoming and looking for new residents to move in. And the whole pandemic experience of being able to work from home has really changed a lot of people's minds about what kind of community they want to live in. And so a number of the places that we filmed in, we're seeing a growth, as Sue mentioned, of people who were like, we don't want to live in a big city anymore. And all of a sudden, it's a possibility for us to live in a smaller community.
So, Sue, as you start thinking about possibilities, if it's not First Cobalt, or as it's now known, Electra, if it's not them, what then?
Small business interests. We've seen a lot of small businesses start up. Maybe they don't have 100 employees, but they have 5 or 10 employees. But I think one thing that's really important that I must emphasize here is that in order for the North to prosper and the region to prosper, we need reliable high-speed internet and cell phone access to attract businesses. And right now we don't have it. We were made aware of it through the pandemic, how we really need reliable internet and telephone access. And governments the federal and provincial government has committed to funding projects, but it's slow in coming, and it needs to be broader based, and we need that quickly. And we need the North to have high-speed internet access and telephone service. And we also need a strategic plan. We need communities along the Highway 11 corridor, for instance, here, to come together, and instead of working in silos, to come together to create strategic plans like it was mentioned, to attract people from not only the city, but international people to come here. And I believe attracting immigrants is going to be a huge game changer for this region. We saw it could almost come full circle, because people from the 4 corners of the world came here at the turn of the century to mine. Italians, Poles, Finns, Scots, and they brought a diversity with them. And that, I think, is how we have survived through the years. Our strength is diversity and resilience. And I really believe that bringing immigrant populations here is going to be a game changer. And I believe that this region is at a crossroads, an important crossroads right now. And we have a lot of opportunities to prosper and boom.
And boom instead of bust. That would be a nice thing.
Instead of bust.
Right on.
Yeah.
Well, Greg, maybe you could follow up in this regard. Do you think governments are adequately seized of the idea that Sue just mentioned, that none of this is possible without access to broadband in a major way? Do people get that now?
Well, people get that, but there's 3 pretty significant failings on the part of provincial governments and the federal government. The first is we don't have a 21st century vision for non-metropolitan Canada. Time and time again, I see provinces move forward a 1950s and 1960s vision of mobilizing for resource extraction only. The second is we're not seeing a coordinated investment strategy. Just imagine in metropolitan Toronto, the amount of investment that's been needed to make that a 21st century fabulous city. And then look at all of our small places that have not had that kind of investment. They touched upon broadband and those kinds of things, but you can't drive along these corridors without having your cell phone reception drop out. The key safety device most people travel with now doesn't work across most of those things. And the last thing governments are really missing out on is that when they do initiatives to be of assistance to non-metropolitan Canada, they do it through a singular department or a singular initiative, some sort of silver or magic bullet solution. When we created this non-metropolitan landscape in the post-Second World War period, it was a whole of government initiative. We reshaped healthcare, we reshaped education, we reshaped transportation, communication, economic development, finance, local government. And we're not doing that now. We haven't fundamentally got a new vision. We're not investing, and we don't have a whole of government approach. Those are pretty significant challenges. But the states that are doing it have leapfrogged ahead of Canada in terms of non-metropolitan government, and we've got to stay competitive.
Yeah.
And you have put the word forward. I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight on TVO and remind everybody that Crossroads Beyond Boom and Bust is Jennifer Horvath's latest contribution to this network. It was on earlier this evening, and we look forward to the ensuing 5 episodes.
Thank you so much.
Jennifer, thank you very much. And Sue, Greg, and Sahab, thanks so much for joining us as well.
Thank you so much. Have a great week.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.